Hi everyone, welcome to this video. Now in this video, we're going to be discussing how to set up synchronous data access via API workflows. What this means is how do we access information in our database and provide it back or reveal it immediately to the user. Now, the reason why we have to use API workflows in some cases is because we need to access information which is hidden by privacy rules, meaning that we can't just use do a search for. Now, in this video, we're going to go over an example and a use case which may be applicable to you. So let's jump into this video and get started. So I'm sitting here on a social media application where users can post information and view other profiles. Now, for a user to gain access to our social media application, they need to provide this invite code over here. And these invite codes are actually provided by existing users on our platform. And the way that we've set this up, if I jump over to my database over here, is on the user, we have this field called invite code of text. So every user has a unique invite code to them that they can provide to other users to invite them onto our platform. Now, what we also store is we want to store who every single user on our platform has been invited by as well. Something I want to highlight is we do have privacy rules associated to this invite code, and what you can see here is that if a user is not signed up, if a user is not logged into our platform, they can't view any invite code on our application. And that makes sense because we don't want them to be able to view the invite code and get into our application if they haven't actually been invited by someone on our app. But what it does create for us as developers is a bit of an issue. So when a user signs up to our application, we need a way to check and match if this invite code is actually a real invite code which has been provided to them by another user. But we can't just use do a search for and check that because it is hidden behind privacy rules. So how can we access this invite code information and make this check if it is hidden behind privacy rules? Well, we do have a way, and we're going to show you how to do this using the API connector and a backend workflow which we set up. As a side note, this method that we are going to show you is really useful if you do have any highly sensitive data that you don't want to be revealed, or only certain parts of it can be visible to a user on the front end. So what you can do is you can use this method to run a workflow only on the backend. Let's get started. So our first step is to create a new backend workflow, and a backend workflow can be accessed via an API call. So what we can actually do here is we can call our own backend workflow via the API connector. So let me go to my backend workflows. And what we want to do is we want to create this workflow which checks if the invite code matches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new API workflow, and I'm going to call it code check like so. I'm going to have it exposed as a public API workflow. I want this box to be unchecked because I want anyone who is accessing this particular workflow to have authentication. I want to check this box. So I do want to ignore privacy rules when I'm running this workflow. We have it set to manual definition. And now what I want to do is I want to set up the parameters. So what is being sent to this backend workflow? And because what we're doing is we're checking for that invite code, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this one invite code. And it's going to be the invite code that the user provides. And it's going to be of type text. Now what I want to do is I want to set up the workflow where we check if there is actually a match. So what we're doing is we're going to do return data from the API. And what we're going to do first is we're going to go code match ? And then we're going to go yes or no. So in this section, what we're going to do is we're going to check if that code, that the invite code that is provided by the user on sign up actually matches with any on our platform. So what we need to do is do a search for users, and then check if the invite code is equal to the invite code which has been provided to us in this backend workflow. And what we want to do is we go first item is not empty. So if it is not empty, then the code match returns a yes. If it is empty, it will return a no. Now, the other thing that I want to do is I also want to return the user who has invited me. So I'm going to call this one user and set this one to be user. And then I'll just copy this expression, paste this expression in, and I will delete this bit. So it just does a search for user's first item and it returns that user who invited the person who is now signing up. So basically what I've done is for this backend workflow, we provide that invite code that the user provides on sign up. Then we do a check to make sure that it actually matches with an invite code in our system. And if it does, we also return the user. If it does not, we return no, and we don't return this user information. So now that we've got this backend workflow set up, we need a way to pass the invite code from the user providing this on the front end in the sign up to this backend workflow to run the check. And the way that we can do that is by initiating an API call. So what I'll do now is I'll jump over to my plugins tab, and I need to create an API call to actually connect to my backend and connect to this workflow that I've just set up so I can receive this information. So the API name is just going to be Bubble API. And then what I want to do is I want to add a shared header, and I'm going to write authorization, then I'm going to write bearer, and I'm going to go to my settings tab. I'm going to go to my API section and I'm going to click on generate a new API token. I'm going to make the label to be code check because then I just know exactly what this token is referring to, and I'm going to copy this one. I'll then go back to my plugins and I'll just add this one over here. The next thing I would like to do is to set up the API call itself, and I'll give it a really specific name here. So you can put in any name that you would like, but it is good to just refer it in a way that makes sense to you. So here I'm going to write invite code match because that's exactly what this API call is going to be doing. I'm going to be using this as an action as well. The next thing I need to do is I actually need the URL to connect to. So if I jump back over to my settings tab, I can grab this one, which is the workflow API root URL. I can jump over to my plugins and I can just add that one here. Then what I need to do is, this is the API workflow I just set up. And if I click on this one, this is the workflow name. So I want to copy this one. And if I jump back to my plugins, I'm going to pop that in there. So that's how, when you create a new backend workflow, that's how this name relates to actually the API, the way that you call it. Now, something that I do want to do is I actually want to just grab this one. I'll do Control X or Command X and I'll go URL. And I will just pop the value in here. Now, the reason why I did this and I unchecked the private box is because it's referring to our version test environment. So when we go live, I want it to refer to our version live environment. And instead of having to manually adjust and change this URL, what I can actually do is I can add in the term website home URL. And what that will allow me to do is it will allow me to refer to the version test or the version live environment depending on which one I'm actually on. So this is just a little trick to make sure that you don't actually have to update your URL. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to be adding a parameter. And the parameter I want to add is, if I go to this workflow, the key is invite code. So I'll copy that one across and I'll paste it here. Now I need a real value. So if I jump over to my database, jump over to this one, we can see we have an invite code of A, B, C, D. So I'll copy that one, jump over to my plugins tab, and I'll pop that one here and I'll just uncheck the private box. Now I'm going to initialize this call, and you can see that I get an error and it tells me that this should actually be a post. So I'll change this one to post and I'll initialize my call again, and you can see that it is coming through. So if I scroll down to this raw data, what you can see is that all of this information is coming through. But what I do notice is that the entirety of the user information is being sent through. So it's coming through with the email address, for example, and all that user information of the person that they were invited by. And I don't actually want a user who is just signed up to be able to view all this information and have all this information sent to the front end. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to jump over to my workflows here, and I'm going to change this one to be text. And I'm going to change this one to be the unique ID. So I'll just change this to user ID. So what I'm actually going to return now is the user's unique ID. And then what we do when we sign up, we're actually going to schedule another backend workflow to do a search for the user who they were invited by and assign that to the current user who is signing up. And the reason why we are doing this in this way is because the privacy rules mean that we actually can't find the unique ID or see the unique ID as a new user. So if I jump back over to my plugins and we have that change and I reinitialize my call here, you can see that we have a status of a success, code match is true, and the user ID is provided. So the next step is to go to the sign up and login reusable element so we can actually bring this together. So I'll click on group sign up over here, I'll open it up and I'll click on sign up step 1, and we can see that invite code. So when we create an account, we need to do this check. So if I double click on this one, click on edit workflows and I open this up, the first thing I want to do is I actually want to make that API call. So if I search for Bubble API invite code match, we have this one over here. And I'm going to change this one to website home URL. So just like I was mentioning before, what this means is that that path or that core URL will be of the version test or the version live, depending on what environment the user is actually previewing the screen from. What I also want to do is I want to change this one to be input invite codes value. So it is a dynamic value as well. And then I want to add a couple of things. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually terminate this workflow if the code match is no. So basically if we check if the invite code matches, and if it's no, we don't actually want to sign the user up. What I actually want to do before that is I want to create this error alert, and basically I want to inform the user error invite code is not valid, and I only want to run this one when code match is no. Okay, and if we actually are successful, so if response code match is actually yes, what I want to do is if I go to edit workflow over here, I want to add a new parameter being user ID, and I want it to be of type text. And if I just go back up to here and I find this one, I actually want to send that user ID that I'm receiving here, and I want to send it to this one where we're actually signing up the user and saving that information. What I want to do is I actually want to use that user ID to grab the invited by field and populate that with the user who invited them. The only problem is if I go to my privacy rules for the user type here, I can't actually see the unique ID of anyone in our database, right? So I can't actually populate that field without using a backend workflow. So what I need to do is I need to go to my backend workflows and create a new API workflow, which is going to be invited by, and I'm not going to allow it to be public, and I'm going to ignore privacy rules, and I'm going to go created user, or current user would also work, but I'm going to go created user here, and then I'm going to go invited by, and that's going to be a text. And what we're going to do is we're going to make changes to a thing. It's going to be created user. We're going to update the invited by, and they are going to be invited by, do a search for user unique ID, is invited by, okay? And we're gonna go first item, right? And now if I go back to my sign up and login, and I scroll down to here, I'll do schedule, API workflow, invited by, current date time, ignore privacy rules, created user is going to be current user, so the current user is the person who just signed up in step 1, and invited by is going to be the user ID, right? So to run through what we've actually built so far, a user will provide their invite code when they're signing up. They'll then create an account. As we go through this, we will check if the API invite code actually matches, so whether they're actually allowed to join our platform. We will then show an error alert if the invite code is not valid, so if the response code match is no. And I want to change this notification type from success to error, actually. And then we will terminate that workflow. If we decide not to terminate that workflow because we haven't hit this trigger condition, so the code match is actually true, what we then do is we actually sign the user up. And something I actually want to do is I actually want to create an invite code so that this particular user can invite new people. So what I will do is I'll go calculate formula, generate random string. I'll make it 4 characters and I'll just check all of these boxes. And now a new user will be created. So let's actually jump through a preview of that. So what I'll do is I will create a test account here. So I'll go airdev.co, I'll write a test password as well. And what I'll do first is I'll actually write an incorrect invite code, and I'll try and create my account and it'll give me invite code is not valid. Now if I try ABCD, what we can see is that I can sign up and it is all working as expected. Now I did notice a little error there, and what occurs is when I click this sign up button, we change the elements custom state to a processing message, okay? So what I actually want to do is I want to copy this one and I actually want to paste this one and just drag it up to here. And what I want to do is I want to clear this expression, and I only want it to run when we're here. So when it does not match. So what that actually does, it resets the message and it removes that creating account processing message. So let's just see that in action again. So I will put another test account and I'll give it an incorrect invite code. And we can see invite code is not valid and it goes back to create account just as we expected.